So now I'd like to take us right into our programming. First up, you'll be hearing from our research and data analyst, James Anderson, about our 2019 State of Downtown report. This report is the largest of the year for the DVBIA, which means that James has spent the last several months eating, sleeping, and breathing statistics that reflect the state of our downtown core in 2019. James will touch more on this in his introduction, but the 2019 numbers are understandably quite a lot different than what 2020 is going to look like at year end. It's our hope that this report will be an important benchmark for future analysis of the true impact that COVID-19 has had on downtown Vancouver. After James concludes his presentation, we will be hearing from our two subject matter experts, David Ian Gray from Dig 360 Consultants based here in Vancouver, and Craig Patterson, editor-in-chief of the Retail Insider, and he's in the Big Smoke, Toronto. Do they still call it the Big Smoke? I think they do. If you've heard them speak before, you know that their retail expertise is impressive. I look forward to hearing their insights on what's happened thus far and also what's yet to come. Although we won't have time today to take your questions from you, if you have a question about the report, please do feel to send us a note by emailing us at dvbia@dtvan.ca. And now I'll hand it over to James to take us through his presentation, and he'll be sharing his screen. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. I'm just going to share my screen here. Yeah, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Gary, and thank you for everybody attending our virtual presentation of the State of Downtown, a year in review. We have, I think, around 50 people on the call today. So, the State of Downtown is an annual report that summarizes a wide variety of data, year-end industry reports, and notable events that are widely reported in the media. Within each section, we try our best to provide a regional overview for context, then narrow our focus as best we can to the DVBIA's catchment. Some new data sets and information available this year is we dive deeper into car share. We look at how post-secondary institutions contribute to downtown's economy and vibrancy. And we also worked with Environics Analytics to develop resident personas. Our hope is that this edition of the State of Downtown identifies downtown's strengths, celebrates past successes, and provides a greater context that will help the DVBIA and others monitor downtown's road to recovery post-COVID-19. For today's presentation, I'm going to start off by providing a brief overview of some key happenings in 2019. Then I'll highlight the preliminary regional impacts of COVID-19 and conclude by providing examples of downtown's resilience in the face of an uncertain future. So what is the State of Downtown? What a question to ask. When we started compiling information prior to March, the State of Downtown was in a very different situation from what it is now. 2019 was a relatively great year in terms of downtown's economy and vibrancy. Granted, there were challenges and systemic issues that continue to impact our community, which I'll allude to later. So looking back at 2019, I'll briefly go through some key highlights. The office market continued to boom. Vancouver is one of the most sought after office markets in North America, along with Toronto and San Francisco. There's more than 5 million square feet of future office space planned, the majority of which has already been leased or pre-leased. According to Avison Young's 2019 year-end office report, vacancies were low at 2.6%, putting upward pressure on leasing rates as more tech companies chose to establish themselves downtown, which also influenced the scale and design of office space. A good example of this is in December, Amazon reportedly agreed to lease all of the 1.13 million square feet of QuadReal's The Post. CBRE's 2019 Tech 30 report ranked Vancouver first for tech job growth among the top 30 North American markets, surpassing Seattle's growth rate. Since 2015, Vancouver's tech job base grew by 30%. Vancouver is an attractive market for tech companies due to its livability, mix of modern office buildings with a variety of amenities, corporate tax incentives, a relatively low Canadian dollar, welcoming immigration policies, and a large pool of highly skilled labor thanks to more tech degree graduates from our local universities. Startup Genome reported that Vancouver's startup ecosystem was valued at $10 billion, $5 billion above the global median. The ecosystem value is based on the number of intellectual property rights, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship programs, startups, employees, angel investors, and startup events. And 5 companies in the DVBA's catchment were recognized as the fastest growing North American tech companies in Deloitte's Fast 500 ranking. Notably, and I found this interesting, downtown startup Biba, which is located in, at the waterfront station, developed a smart playground system that uses augmented reality. And it was recognized as one of the best inventions of 2019 by Time magazine. Downtown post-secondary institutions like SFU Vancouver and UBC Robson Square continue to play an important role in developing our tech ecosystem, in addition to engaging tens of thousands of people annually in educational, cultural, social, and professional activities. SFU Vancouver's Venture Lab offers startup expertise for participants with innovative business ideas, while UBC Robson Square is home to the UBC Innovation Hub, providing entrepreneurs, researchers, and their partners access to space and wider networks. Innovate BC, the Vancouver Economic Commission, and the Vancouver Startup Week also play an important role in developing Vancouver's tech ecosystem. Vancouver Startup Week welcomed over 7,500 attendees last year to a series of events and workshops. Topics range from building an inclusive culture in tech to how to pitch your idea to investors like a pro. Moving on, tourism increased thanks to a strong destination brand, a record number of cruise ship dockings at Canada Place, the growth of large events at the Vancouver Convention Centre, and the hosting of international sport events like HSBC's World Rugby Sevens and the International Ice Hockey Federation's World Junior Championships. The tourism industry contributes an estimated $4 billion annually to Metro Vancouver's economy and contributes more to BC's GDP than any primary resource. Metro Vancouver welcomed over 11 million overnight visitors in 2019, a 35% increase since 2009. Downtown hotel occupancy rates remained high at 80% compared to the national average of 67%. Similar to the office market and high demand for hotel rooms put pressure on average daily rates, and it made it sometimes challenging to attract large groups due to limited hotel supply and the cost of rooms. Prior to COVID-19, downtown was experiencing a hotel crunch with a net loss of hotel rooms as the office market and hotels competed for limited development space. Vancouver's population continued to expand, and the growing number of downtown residents increased the peninsula's density. Increases in population, the workforce, and tourism put demands on goods and services. In 2018, TransLink saw 473 million boardings across all modes of transit. In response to historic levels of ridership, in 2019, TransLink added 24 new SkyTrain cars on the Expo and Millennium lines and expanded bus service by 41,000 hours. Cadillac Fairview's Pacific Centre welcomed over 23 million visitors and ranked second in Canada for shopping center productivity based on sales per square foot. The glass rotunda in West Georgia, as some of us must be aware, is currently being replaced into a 2-story, 40,000 square foot retail pavilion. And there was little vacancy along downtown retail corridors, Alberni's luxury zone being a notable example. Downtown also continued to welcome international flagship stores like the Dyson Demo Store in Pacific Centre and high-end audio equipment retailer Bang & Olufsen at 410 Howe. Local quick service restaurants like Smack and Tractor expanded their operations, while Granville Street welcomed the Colony Bar. And let's not forget about cannabis. Downtown's first legal retailer, City Cannabis, opened on Robson Street. In terms of arts and culture, public festivals and events like the Vancouver International Film Festival, the Vancouver International Jazz Festival, Taiwan Fest, Vancouver Pride, and Push continue to have a strong downtown presence. The Vancouver Art Gallery raised over $135 million towards the development of its proposed new building, including a $40 million donation from the Chan family. The art gallery also exhibited the works of artists like Alberto Giacometti, a renowned 20th century sculptor and painter, and Dana Claxton, a Vancouver-based Sioux artist whose art investigates notions of Indigenous identity, beauty, and gender. While the Orpheum, home to the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, also hosted the launch of the Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week. The film industry continued to flourish with TV production led by Warner Brothers. Shows like Riverdale, Batwoman, The Flash, and DC's Legends of Tomorrow were shot downtown and generated thousands of jobs for Vancouverites. Downtown also saw the transformation of laneways and parking lots into more welcoming spaces. The Parks Board approved the conversion of a parking lot at Smythe and Richards into a new park, and the DVBIA transformed its third laneway, Canvas Corridor, in partnership with the Robson Business Association, SFU's School for Contemporary Arts, and others. Keeping with Vancouver's legacy of being a leader in environmental activism, the Sustainability Teens organized a climate rally in Schlenik-Hutalunk Square near the Vancouver Art Gallery, where thousands gathered to hear Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg speak. 2019 was not without challenges. There were 3 high-profile labor unrests resulting in job actions and strikes that impacted downtown events and services. Fentanyl continued to contribute to an alarming number of opioid deaths, and the total number of individuals experiencing homelessness in Vancouver reached its highest since counts began in 2005. The current state of downtown is evidently very different today. The city of Vancouver declared a local state of emergency on March 18th to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and to ensure adequate resources were available to maintain our essential services. Dr. Bonnie Henry ordered all restaurants to close with the exception of takeout and delivery. Brick and mortar retailers closed voluntarily to help curb the spread of the virus, as did most office tenants who encouraged employees to work from home. And all major public events were canceled. During these early stages of the pandemic, as most of us are aware, downtown and the city in general is relatively void of its well-known vibrancy. The impacts of businesses and people remain very real. According to a May 14th City of Vancouver report, over 13,000 Vancouver businesses closed. Retail, accommodation, food services, tourism, and social assistance and health sectors were drastically impacted. Approximately 90,000, 22% of Vancouver's workforce, 90,000 jobs were lost, which is 22% of Vancouver's workforce. Women, young people, and those with low income were the most affected. Foot traffic in Granville and West Hastings Street shrunk by 79% when people were advised to stay home and avoid contact with others. At its lowest point, Translic reported an 83% decrease in ridership across all modes, and consequently had to make service cuts. According to STR hotel data, Canadian hotel occupancy rates decreased 79% for the last week of May compared to the same period last year. Vancouver's hotel occupancy rate was around 24%. And the cruise ship industry has been deferred to October, meaning no passenger disembarkments at Canada Place this summer. But as people and businesses took stock of their finances and situations, we saw the federal government step up and offer support with programs like the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, wage subsidies, the Canadian Emergency Business Account, and the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, which we know has its issues. And the provincial government allowed bars and restaurants to deliver liquor and impose eviction moratoriums for residential tenants. BOMA and property managers were also quick to plan for and adapt to the pandemic. For example, by late January, Bentall Green Oak sent a memo advising all tenants of best practices to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Initiatives like Breaking Bread and Takeout to Help Out were created to connect people to local restaurants in need of support. While Mayor Kennedy Stewart urged third-party delivery apps to reduce their high commissions to help struggling restaurants. Restaurants like Nightingale began offering free or discounted meals to healthcare workers, either independently or through national initiatives like Feeding Our Front Lines. While large downtown businesses also donated items to food banks and not-for-profits serving vulnerable populations. And TransLink temporarily waived fares for commuters. We also saw hotels and large community centers converted into housing for the homeless, while the Vancouver Convention Center's West Building became an alternative care site in an effort to boost capacity within regional hospitals. When things seemed their darkest and businesses started to board up their storefronts, the Vancouver Mural Festival partnered with BIAs to support local artists in creating 59 temporary murals on boarded up storefronts. The artwork speaks for itself, inspiring hope and celebrating resilience. And of course, let's not forget the support from our community, which is shown for essential and healthcare workers. Since the state emergency was declared, residents have been consistently cheering every night at 7 p.m. As we entered phase 2 of the province's restart plan, we saw the city, businesses, and other advocacy groups quickly jump into action. Since mid-May, offices and businesses have gradually started to reopen, and murals are gradually being removed from boarded up businesses. Tourism Vancouver is working with partners to promote local tourism around the region through their Come Back campaign. And if you haven't seen this video already, I highly suggest checking it out on Tourism Vancouver's website. The City of Vancouver also expanded its temporary patio program. Well, just recently, the province eased restrictions that required restaurants to operate at 50% of their regular capacity. And Translink ridership is rebounding, with an 85% increase since April. Although businesses are gradually reopening, and the road to recovery may be long and will vary between sectors. Experts agree that it's still early to reliably quantify the impacts of COVID-19 on the office market and business closures. The economic impacts could still intensify, especially on independent businesses, as we wait for a vaccine. A recent poll by the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses reports that 40% of Canadian businesses deem their health as bad. Nonetheless, our report, which will be shared after our presentation, highlights that prior to COVID-19, downtown Vancouver was in a relatively good place. With a large downtown population of over 100,000 residents, a vibrant street culture, a world-renowned destination brand, and strong market fundamentals, all of which contribute to a solid base upon which we can gradually reboot our economy. We also know that downtown residents tend to be actively involved in their communities. We see evidence of these behaviors in grassroots digital initiatives to support local business and through commentary in downtown resident Facebook groups and local media articles. Residents want local businesses that serve their community to survive. A recent survey by the International Council of Shopping Centers revealed that 78% of Canadian consumers said that impacts of the pandemic has made them more aware of the importance of small businesses in their community, and therefore will support them more in the future. And there is hope. BC is flattening the curve and faring better than some other provinces and their neighbors down south. Granted, as we know in recent events, that there has been a resurgence of cases around the globe. Recently, Dr. Bonnie Henry approved a plan for Vancouver to be a possible NHL hub city, a positive indicator of the province's confidence in managing the pandemic. The general alignment between various levels of government, advocacy groups, businesses, and the community is also a testament to the region's adaptability and resilience. A recent Insight West poll reports that COVID-19 government programs and initiatives have been met with astounding levels of public support among British Columbians. So what is the state of downtown? I think we can agree that things are tough. Our independent small businesses, restaurants, tourism companies, and hotels are struggling. And now more than ever, they need support from us in various levels of government. Key happenings and data from 2019 will provide an important pre-COVID-19 benchmark. Moving forward, the DVBIA will continue to collect data to monitor the impacts of COVID-19 on the area and track downtown's gradual road to recovery. Thank you.
Great, thanks, James. And that was a great overview of the report. And you've mentioned it, but I'll repeat it, that it will be available on our website at dtvan.ca for you to download. Now, before we move into our Q&A with David and Craig, let me tell you a little bit about them. And you can start your videos, both David and Craig. David Ian Gray founded Dig 360 to help retail and retail-minded executives. He is a recognized expert on retail and shopper trends, consistently producing high-impact knowledge for over 25 years. David often presents on emerging retail trends, the role of retail in a sustainable future, and the need for strategic adaptation and management of innovation, which makes him a perfect fit for today's Q&A. And from Toronto, Craig Patterson is a retail analyst and consultant at the Retail Council of Canada. He is also the editor-in-chief of Retail Insider. Craig has studied the Canadian retail landscape for the past 25 years, and he holds a Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Laws degrees. We've had the pleasure of having Craig speak at a past event and knew that we wanted to have him back for a second time to share more of his valuable insights on retail. Just so the audience knows, we're going to just do a Q&A that I'm going to be asking the questions, and that will take us to the top of the hour when we're scheduled to finish. So why don't I start off with this first question, and I'm just going to let you guys jump in, David and Craig, as you feel appropriate. And I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of a debate here as well, that you don't just agree on everything.
Craig is wrong. Go ahead.
So the first question is, what was the state of retail prior to the pandemic, both locally and nationally?
Do you want me to go on that one? I could start if you want.
Yep.
Yeah, downtown Vancouver overall was quite healthy, I would say. The dynamics are tremendous, as James explained in the report. Very diverse downtown core. It had an office population, a residential population. All of that is very good stuff. We did see a bit of a slowdown in retail in certain areas towards the end of 2019, especially say the luxury stores. Basically between the Hotel Vancouver and the Trump and Shangri-La hotels to the west. In Canada, generally, what was interesting is we were seeing some retailers doing very well, but we were also seeing many downsizing their operations in terms of brick and mortar stores. So in January, I did a tally and found that over 1,000 individual store locations were already set to close permanently in Canada in the first quarter of 2020. And that was even before we had any idea that COVID-19 would become a thing in terms of having to close retail stores across the country. So as we were going into COVID-19, this was already, from what I could see anyways, a very challenging time for quite a few retailers in this country, not to mention restaurants and other businesses as well. Rents, as well as taxes additional and whatnot. The cost of real estate was very much a hindrance. We were seeing costs going up in other areas, including labor. All of this was making business challenging, and COVID-19 has just thrown in a monkey wrench, which is making things far, far more challenging at this time, and for a while to come, I think.
1,000 companies are doing that, is what you said.
1,000 individual store locations were set to close. So 88 locations for Bentley Leathers would be an example. Starbucks across the country, this wasn't in those numbers, they only just announced it, but another example would be about 200 Canadian locations. So it was over 1,000, including the smaller independents that were closing across the country. And it could have been in the 1,500 range for all I know. It is harder to quantify the smaller ones. And there were, well over 500 just in the large retail category that were going to be closing locations.
Craig, just in fairness though, because I actually gave you a shout out on LinkedIn this week about this. You're one of the few that actually tracks openings. And so there are those closings, but there's also a heck of a lot of openings the last few years as well, with brands going direct to consumer and so forth. And do you have any figures on that?
Yeah, it was interesting. In the past 3 years, we had more than 110 international brands come into Canada by opening their first stores. That's incredible. It's probably record breaking. I don't know if we've had that at any time in our history. Not all 110 of those businesses still operate in Canada, which is interesting as well. But nevertheless, probably 90 or 95 of those brands are still operating in Canada. It'll probably be about 85 in a few months. But nevertheless, we were still seeing stores opening. So even though, I was being a bit, I think, grim in terms of things being not, so positive in some respects, we certainly have had entrepreneurs opening businesses. We've had new concepts being tested. Pop-up retail has been quite big, or at least it certainly was. And then Canada really was seeing a lot of interest from international brands. But I do also think that we were getting to a saturation point in certain areas. We were seeing a lot of fashion retailers. I was actually, as a consultant, working with a couple of fashion retailers from Europe that ended up not coming to Canada. And I think that was the best decision. They would have just been, another lower mid-priced fashion retailer.
Okay. Well, how about you, David, on that first question? What are your thoughts in terms of what was the state of retail prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think what's kind of interesting with this is there was this building momentum that was all about turbulence and change in retail. But it wasn't all bad, right? It's change. Let's call it change. And there was a myth about a retail apocalypse, which may be actually an apocalypse now because of COVID, and we may get through it and not have that happen. But what was going on was the fundamental nature of retail and its relationship to adjacent sectors was changing. And by relationship, I mean its relationship to landlords and developers. The term of lease, Craig mentioned pop-up, just the whole definition of what retail was and how it was innovating was building momentum. But to say there was going to be no more stores, in January, there was a press release from Amazon saying it was going to have 3,000 Go stores by the end of the year. So I reject the idea that this is an acceleration of just the demise of physical space being set aside for retail. The nature of it was changing. What we were finding was legacy retail, as I call them, like the old school retailers that were not, it wasn't enough to just put up a website to sell something, to actually restructure the organization to become more nimble, to shed baggage in terms of culture and silos and actually integrate channels and figure out how to put the customer's experience at a center and then build a solution back to it. When we see in the news the likes of the Gap in the States or Reitmans in Canada getting into trouble, they were getting into trouble before now. They were getting into trouble the last 5 years. A lot of it, you're almost too big to make that adjustment in many cases. And in other cases, and I hate to say this, but the leadership had spent their whole careers inside the bubble of retail or perhaps even one organization. So what to them was transformation was really to an outsider just tweaking an old model. So I think we were seeing that happening. But there's a lot of excitement. Like Craig mentioned, direct-to-consumer brands getting into retail. It was kind of cool what was going on. And I think, James, you mentioned Dyson, great example of a brand that was now opening stores around the world. Canada Goose was growing. And even Starbucks, by the way, like with their closures, what they're doing right now, every year they'll close stores, underperforming stores, and then open new, which is smart. A lot of retail was really reluctant to ever close a store, no matter how awful it was, because it's a sign of failure, I guess. Culturally, that was hard to do, but Starbucks does it. What I've heard is they're actually, because of what they're learning today in terms of how to move more nimbly, they're taking a 5-year strategic plan and compressing it into a couple of years, which is kind of cool. So I think we were seeing coming up to 2019, grappling with change and then all the ripple effects. And I think a lot of your listeners or viewers are in the landlord developer sector. The whole notion of how do you put valuation on a retail space was up for grabs because the old sales per square foot model is just rapidly becoming archaic, but we haven't really replaced it with anything. So there's a growing clash between what the desire for rents were and then what the true valuation of what a property might be. So lots of those examples right across the board as well. I'll kind of pause there.
Okay, well, we'll jump ahead to the next question. Thanks for the fulsome answers. Really helpful to those that are listening in. So we're now just past 3 months, at least in Vancouver, in terms of living with the pandemic. What have been the most successful pivots or innovations that retailers have implemented from your perspective to respond to the pandemic? Why don't you start, David?
Yeah, we probably both have some good examples. There's the ones that we all hear about. We've got a client, actually locally here, we work across Canada, but we've got a local client called Peregrine and their division Acorn, which Craig would know as well. And a lot of your people here, I think, would know as one of the best in Canada when it comes to store fixture and creative store fixtures and design work inside stores. And they work with Lulu and Aritzia and BC Liquor and Sage, and you go down the list. And on the restaurant side, Acorn does a lot of food service. They when everything shut down, they were pretty I'm gonna say down in the dumps, because all the plans for the year were pretty shot. And then they were able to get one of the very first plexiglass sneeze guards, for want of a better term, contracts, and they can't, they're just run off their feet right now with business. There's lots who started adapting around sanitizer or masks. I find all of that quite boring now, because everyone's kind of doing that. Is that really innovative when the 10th brewery or distillery is doing that? But it's still great that they're able to pivot. And we've got another client of ours, Chatter Research, was an SMS research tool. They flipped it after a pilot with Staples, where they can have a QR code on signage outside a store while you're lined up, and the customer who's waiting can get on their screen all the COVID protocol information they need when they get on the inside. There's a Vancouver company, the name escapes me, maybe someone on the call here would know them, but they're setting up appointments for boutiques. They would do appointments for wine tours in the Okanagan, and they're pivoting that. And then I'll throw Arc'teryx in, which is now making really innovative designed ER gowns that are now in demand all around the world, which I kind of wonder they may keep producing long after COVID ends. So there's a few, as for example. And Craig, you may have some also.
How about you, Craig?
You answered a lot of, I think that's great. I mean, certainly we saw businesses getting online. There was a fairly rapid movement across the country to get, Main Street businesses, or whatever you want to call it, smaller businesses on the web. I think that this is a bit, if we're talking about the acceleration of some of the trends already, we were seeing a move online. Certainly not saying that brick and mortar retail was going to be finished by any means whatsoever, but certainly the percentage of shopping online was growing. Curbside pickup is a bit interesting. I mean, that's not necessarily a new thing, but I was just in a conversation today with a broker and a landlord saying that this is something that's here to stay. Say in our suburban shopping centers, there may be different dockets set up for different retailers. You'll be able to come and pick up your purchase. Consumers already that are doing this, if it works, which there's some glitches here and there, some consumers are finding this very favorable. It's a great way to save time getting out, but the shopping centers that are, and again, this is more the suburban ones than say CF Pacific Center, but some of the shopping centers are saying, well, why are we spending all this money on this retail experience inside when people are just coming to our parking lot and leaving? So that's a challenge, but nevertheless, curbside pickup is a thing. Here in Toronto, we actually have a retailer that is open that sells face masks. So that's interesting. A lot of brands, from Harry Rosen down to smaller ones had done things like creative face masks. We had distilleries doing hand sanitizer. But I think that takes it to another level. I'm not sure what the lifespan of that will be, but unless there's a real great vaccine or something found, I think face masks maybe become even more common in our wardrobe. I was thinking of wearing one for this segment, but I'm in my home, so I'm fine. I don't go out that much these days anyways, but I think that we probably will see more innovation, probably around the digital space, as well as what will be coming into physical spaces moving forward, because I think the dynamics have changed a little bit in terms of occupancy and the way that we'll be interacting with physical spaces in the next while.
Charles, can I throw two other things in on this particular topic, because one of the unseen innovations that's happening right now in every chain I've spoken to, including those that may still be struggling through their own viability and transformation, every single executive I've spoken to has said they've been blown away by the ability to turn on a dime internally, to shut down. Like, the shutting down was pretty amazing, how quick, now we're a few months down the road, we forget. But that was incredible how that happened so quickly. And then once shut down, I'm hearing story after story about inside of organizations, just a lot of the barriers to decision making have just had by necessity been overcome. And everyone's kind of looking around going, wow, we could do things so much faster than we did before. And I think there's internal innovation going on in terms of how retailers and food service are operating. And the other thing I think is noteworthy is, and yet I hope we talk about it shortly in more detail, is independent retail. Independent retail pre-COVID, 2019 and prior, I would say at best, we pretty much ignored it. It was just a thing there. We didn't really, unless you were in that sector specifically, we took it for granted. And maybe at worst, a lot of pundits would denigrate it and say, well, they're toast with Amazon, they're done. And I think what's kind of interesting right now, it's the middle-sized players that are really under duress right now. And I think there is potential hope for the independents in a way that wasn't there before. And like the graphic James showed on the ICSC survey, it's on people's radar again. I think there's another, maybe we'll talk later, but I think there's a huge caution around that, in that none of those businesses were built for sustained loss, through multiple months. And so, there's a viability issue. But I think there's also a lot of hope for independent business that may not have been on the radar a year ago.
Yeah, I think that gets to the next question, actually. How do you predict major downtowns and central business districts will fare compared to Main Street shopping districts or suburban malls in the coming months and years?
I think Craig should start off that one for sure.
That's a good question. And I guess it depends on major downtowns, because downtown Vancouver's dynamics are far stronger than almost any other downtown in North America. Again, it's got a large residential population. I think the numbers, I was counting on my fingers, no, it wasn't that bad, about 120,000 people living in the downtown peninsula. I think it was 60 in the BIA, in the downtown, and then about 50 in the West End. That's terrific. I mean, that would be the second largest downtown in Canada in terms of population after Toronto. So having a downtown, now downtown Vancouver has other benefits, there's many of them. Beautiful scenery, water on most sides, a stunning, gigantic 800-acre park, or maybe it's over 1,000. The dynamics are terrific, but for other downtowns in most places in North America that have been in a downturn since probably the 1950s or 60s, I think this is going to be a very challenging time for some downtowns. They do not have large populations. A lot of these downtowns are reliant on office workers. And the question is, how is work from home going to play out in terms of the importance of a downtown core in the future? Because in places like Edmonton and Calgary, they've really become work centers for the most part. They don't have large urban populations. In terms of main streets, I would say that the health of the main streets can be there if the locals are shopping. If there is enough of a population density. Speaking specifically about Vancouver, I think this is a bit of a challenge again, because even though Vancouver is quite high density when you look at the city overall in comparison to other places in North America, you still have 66-foot wide lots on the west side, and with single detached houses on them. And I know there's, laneway housing or whatever coming, but nevertheless, this is not Barcelona. There's still a fairly low density there. We've seen neighborhoods like, Little India that on Main and 49th that have struggled. Did I get the name right? I think it is.
Punjabi Market.
Punjabi Market, I'm sorry. Yes, I think Little India is Toronto. and then shopping centers. Again, this really depends on the comfort of the consumer to go into shopping centers. One of the benefits is certainly most visitors to suburban shopping centers, for the most part, will be coming by private automobile. People may feel more comfortable about that, but at the same time, shopping center landlords are going to have to make consumers feel comfortable going into those public spaces. I was looking at this hierarchy of risk. I'm not sure if I believe it all, but shopping centers and restaurants were quite high. Street front retail was lower. And I thought, yeah, but I mean, where I am, I go into the Yorkville Village, which used to be called Hazelton Lanes, and I'll be outside on the street. I don't see a huge difference between the two. I don't feel there's a huge risk, but nevertheless, there may be a perception amongst some, and perception is reality. So in the case of, downtown Vancouver, I'm not as concerned. I don't think things are going to be nearly what they were in 2019 overall. But I think downtown Vancouver will be fine. But, you look at, I don't know, downtown Nashville or Winnipeg, Indianapolis, I should probably use Canadian examples, Edmonton, Calgary. This is going to be very, very challenging for a lot of businesses in the downtown cores, as well as the downtown cores health in general. And with the closure or with the vacancy of retail space, be it restaurants, fitness, retail, that is going to change the perception for some of those areas. When you have a lot of vacancies in an area, it creates a lack of vibrancy. That affects perception. That may make a place feel a little bit more unsafe. I remember when I was living in the West End, Davie Street had some vacancies. People started camping out in the front. It did change the dynamic of the neighborhood a little bit. And I know that this just happens throughout different parts of the city still. So this is going to be, I think, a challenging time, probably for all three to a degree.
What about you, David? What are your insights on that question?
I got that I like when, by the way, Craig and I do this sometimes without the audience. We just call each other up and go, okay, what do you think? He'll say something and then it goes off. So a couple things. First of all, we're reading more and more predictions about the new normal or the new consumer. Just stop. Like we're in a, if any of you have read up on systems thinking or chaos theory, we're in a very complex system of interdependencies, not just consumers and retailers, but all aspects of employment and the office towers and tourism and all these other factors and macro issues. And everyone's highly strung right now. So we saw with a police incident in the US that was horrific, but is not the first time that's ever happened in recent years. Look at the flashpoint. So for the next while, all I'm going to predict is there's going to be other random events that are going to have knock-on effects that we can't predict. And the idea, one of our clients had a great line saying, there's no new normal, there's a rolling series of new realities that we have to react to. So that's the first thing to kind of get on the table. In any research that kind of research something today and then predicts that's what the consumer is going to be doing. Even if I said as a shopper, I'm not going to do something a year from now, who the hell knows, right? It depends on so many variables. However, there is a couple of things to unpack in what Craig just said, especially I agree 100%. When you get momentum moving so far as a force in a certain direction, it is hard to kind of unwind it in a hurry. So when he talked about the downtown cores, Calgary, Winnipeg, and so on, that really is a concern because even if there's a vaccine in January, et cetera, once a certain level of damage is done, it can take a long time to recover that. So my concern, I hinted at earlier, is we're going to see a lot of business that was on the way out anyway because it wasn't adapting to the new world order of Amazon and et cetera. That was going to happen anyway, but there's a lot of really viable business, including indie business, Main Street business, that if a critical mass of it just runs out of funds before all this is dealt with, including a second wave in the fall and having to invest in inventory for holiday, how would you even do that? It may take a long time for those street fronts to build up again. Like I used to live in Gastown and I've recently driven down there and it's so sad what's happened down there. And that's adjacent to your BIA. I don't think as a shopper, I don't have these lines in the sand in the city. I just think of the city. So I do think there's some concerns. And I think when James went through his overview, I was just writing things down like the dependencies that business has, office space. A lot of the business is based on office traffic. And Craig pointed out how much of that's coming back anytime soon. The tech hubs were promising, but the tech guys are the first to say, hey, we could go permanently work from home. Like Shopify has said, that's going to be their default model. Tourism, right? And someone I think asked in the Q&A about luxury and tourism. I think luxury completely depends on tourism in Vancouver. Vancouver's not organically a high-end market. Like we don't have the employment base but people bring their money here. Either they've retired here or they've made it elsewhere. They travel here. And I think Alberni was in trouble anyway. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about money laundering, but that was totally part of that story. And it just didn't get caught up in it the way the automotive or the homes did. And so that was already dampening. Transit, a lot of your business downtown is dependent on transit, bringing people downtown to shop. And again, that comfort level of, are people going to be, and again, I don't know, I don't want to be negative here because there's so many scenarios that are all in play. People actually may get very comfortable with transit because why? Maybe transit's going to be the cleanest it's ever been in their whole lifetime on a go forward basis. And they go, wow, this is way better than I ever knew it. I'm going to ditch the car because I feel safe now. So we don't know. But if transit stays leveled off, then you've got a problem downtown. What about events, nightlife? Yeah, I'm just going down the list. So I think there's some challenges. The biggest one for me, though, is the fact that we fragment our industries out into different little pieces. So we're basically all saying, whether we know it or not, we're saying to restaurateurs and retailers, you turn around our economy again, please. Like, it's not going to be forestry. It's not going to be oil and gas. It's going to be you guys. However, we're going to not let you have too much traffic, and we're going to make sure that you're operating, but you're going to have added cost to operate. And I'm not knocking it. Like, I know we have to do it. I'm just saying the reality to these people, your costs are up because you have to have a certain sanitization level and your plexiglass and all these costs, the training staff, your rents are the same. And I know a lot of you guys on the call are landlords. I know a lot of you did some really nice gestures, but there wasn't enough of it. And the fact there's an eviction moratorium, it doesn't matter. Like, there's a huge break of trust that's occurred right now. And so if you're a retailer, you're now in sort of, I guess, either stick it to the landlord or I can't trust them. If there's a second wave in the fall, who am I going to trust? And will the moratorium cover that? And all these questions, right? And the reality for you guys is, unless you're redeveloping a site, so you're using this as cover for it, or unless you want to get rid of a tenant you didn't like, your future is going to be at a lower rent level. So I would have thought that some of the leaders would have vocally said, hey, let's try and make a gesture to the tenants and try and keep the ones we've got at a lease level that's higher and get them through it. Because if you lose them, anyone you guys sign up a year from now, I promise you, that's a prediction I'll stick with. You're not getting pre-COVID rent. You may in a cherry pick spot or two, but not across the board. So there's a lot of turbulence going on. And I think the only thing you can do is just stay incredibly nimble and start to view all of this as an ecosystem. The office towers, knowing that you've got people coming in that are going to need coffees, etc. Let your tenants downstairs know, here's what our prediction is for the fall. You know what the patterns are. And the city plays a big role in this as well. You've done a good job. Anyone here from the city, I think, has done a pretty good job trying to change some of the rules around curbside and so on. But when we did work with the city a few years ago, all your zoning was based on 1990s models of retail. Like, hey, great opportunity for everyone to get caught up. So there's my little rant. Over to you, Charles.
Well, you know what? You were just getting warmed up, but we're out of time. So 3 o'clock is just around the corner, so to speak. And again, I just want to close off by thanking both of you. We could have probably done this for another 30 minutes. We didn't get to all the questions that we had planned. So thanks again, James, for your presentation. Thanks, David and Craig, for your valuable insights. Certainly, we likely will be revisiting this topic in terms of future retail. Next week, we're doing a session on office space. And again, a big thanks to our outgoing board chair, Gary Pooney. We wish we can give you a proper in-person send-off as we typically would at our EGM. And we're not able to do that, but we may have an opportunity at some point in the future to do that. But Gary, thanks for all your time and support throughout the years. And so that's our time for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we look forward to sharing more digital content with you in the coming weeks. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.